Google them. They win. Man, what a game that was last night with Indiana winning their first ever national championship against Miami, beating them 27-21. Welcome back to the Gritty College Football Podcast. I'm Karsten, and today we're going to be reacting to the national championship game. So, Indiana beat Miami 27-21 with Riley Nowakowski and Fernando Mendoza scoring touchdowns for Indiana, and Isaiah Jones scoring a touchdown after the blocked punt. For Miami, Mark Fletcher Jr. scored 2 touchdowns and Malachi Toney scored 1. So first, let's take a look at how Indiana played in this game. Indiana was able to win against an elite run defense despite only having 2.9 yards per carry, which was their lowest yards per carry of the season. And this is something we looked at in our last episode where we broke down how they performed against previous elite run defenses and what it would take for them to win if they were held under 4 yards per carry, which is what happened today, with them even getting held under 3 yards per carry. Which is crazy for how good their run game is. And what we said last week was that Mendoza would have to be extremely efficient and he would have to put the offense on his shoulders. But that's not necessarily what we saw last night. Mendoza didn't need to be a superhero, and he went for 16 for 27 with a 59% completion percentage and only threw for 186 yards with 0 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. But that stat line doesn't necessarily paint the whole picture. Mendoza faced a lot of pressure with his O-line grading out very badly in the pass blocking, and he was sacked 3 times during the game. But despite this pressure, he was able to come up huge in really big moments and was very clutch. He was 2 for 2 on 4th down attempts and had a huge 4th and 5 conversion to Charlie Becker on a 20-yard pass with 12 minutes left in the game. And then on the same drive, he converted another 4th and 5 with a rushing touchdown with 9 minutes left in the game. And then with 3 minutes left in the game, he had a huge 3rd and long conversion to Charlie Becker again to set them up in field goal range. So he was coming up big in all of the key moments during this game, especially late, which was extremely important for Indiana's offense, which struggled at times during the game without their run game. And even though Fernando Mendoza had his worst game of the playoffs from an efficiency standpoint, he was able to come up big when Indiana needed him, and he really showed why he was the Heisman in this game. And this year, we really didn't see any moments from players which really could be considered a Heisman moment. Fernando Mendoza had that 3rd down touchdown against Penn State, which was, I guess, technically his Heisman moment before he won the award. But that touchdown really felt like a true Heisman moment, and even though it came after he won, I think it really cemented his legacy as a worthy Heisman winner. He, on 4th and 5, they were up 3 in field goal range with, it was 9 minutes left in the 4th quarter, and they really hadn't been able to move the ball crazy well all game, and they call a QB draw. Even though they were up 3, they could have taken the points, gone up 6, but instead they call QB draw, and Fernando Mendoza jukes a defender, breaks a tackle, and then dives into the end zone to bring Indiana up 10 points with 9 minutes left in the game. And, I mean, if that's not Heisman material, I don't know what is. That was probably the most electrifying play of the entire season and was definitely a true Heisman moment. And that's something that I don't think any other player in the country can say with how important that play was, given the stakes, given how the drive before that Miami had gone and scored and brought that game back to a 3-point game. And also just with history behind it and how bad Indiana has been historically and then he goes and puts the whole state of Indiana on his back for that touchdown. And it proved to be key because then Indiana went down and scored a touchdown in the next drive. So that was a key play, and was able to keep Indiana in the lead to hang on, especially in the end of the game. So that was just an incredible performance by Fernando Mendoza, Charlie Becker as well, getting some huge plays and huge catches down the stretch. So, and then on the other side of the ball, Indiana's defense played lights out all game. They were able to shut out Miami in the first half, and it even took Miami until there were 4 minutes left in the first half to get their second first down of the game, which is just absolutely nuts. The defense held Miami's offense to 3 out of 11 on third down attempts. Sorry, and despite not really getting a ton of pressure on Karsten Beck, they were able to get off the field through excellent tackling and pass coverage. They gave the offense a buffer, and they made it so the offense really didn't need to be perfect. And they kind of gave them some wiggle room, especially with with that shutout in the first half. And they just played incredible, especially the pass coverage all night long. And so incredible performance by the offense and the defense. However, football is a game of three phases, and a lot of people talk about that, but not every team really pays that much attention to their special teams. Indiana is not one of those teams, though. They really showed how special teams can win or lose you a game in these elite-type matchups. And in this game, they were able to benefit from a missed field goal and also a blocked punt where they converted the blocked punt for a touchdown. And stat I thought was especially crazy was that was the 8th blocked punt for Indiana in the 2 years that Cignetti has been there, which is just a crazy stat, and I think highlights really how much emphasis they're putting on their special teams. And the blocked punt they had in this game wasn't even an all-out rush onto the punt. It was just one man, and they missed the block, and he was able to get a hand on it. And they converted it for a touchdown, which was a crazy play with around 6 minutes left in the third quarter. So huge play late in the game, and was really a big momentum shifter after Miami had a long rushing touchdown in the third quarter. So really big play by the special teams, and Indiana had a great day in all three phases of the game. Indiana's number one turnover margin edge showed up in the game again as well, this time to ice the game. So with 50 seconds left in the game, Miami was at Indiana's 40-yard line, and they were pretty hot on offense. They were able to move down the field pretty effectively. And then Karsten Beck throws an interception to the Indiana defense to ice the Natty and win Indiana their first ever national championship. So really huge play by the defense. And another crazy stat was this was Indiana's 30th turnover this season that they were able to take away. And that was the number one turnover margin in college football. So really incredible execution from all sides of Indiana's team. And that's just one of the most mind-blowing stats of the season is how effective they were getting turnovers all year. And then another key to the game for Indiana was their aggression on fourth down and third down all game. And I think Cignetti's play calling here was a huge reason for why they won the game. And they did this by going for fourth down twice when they already had a 3-point lead. They were in field goal range, and they could have kicked a field goal to take that 6-point lead. And both of these plays were on the same drive, but it just was incredibly gutsy to call that passing play to Charlie Becker, which went for like 20 yards. And also then to call that fourth and 5 rushing touchdown for Fernando Mendoza. So really aggressive play calling towards the end of the game, and that's something we've seen is really important in these really big-time college football games. Last year, we saw Ohio State be very aggressive in the playoffs. They came out to huge leads against Tennessee and Oregon, and then also against Notre Dame in the national championship game. And they did this by coming out of the gates hot. They were throwing deep passes. They were being extremely aggressive. And then when the national championship was on the line and it was 3rd and 11, instead of running the ball to drain more clock and then give Notre Dame the ball back, they decided to take a deep shot to Jeremiah Smith, and that's what ultimately sealed the national championship for Ohio State. And then the year before that, Michigan against Alabama in the Rose Bowl had wrinkles in their game plan, and they were aggressive on 4th down as well, with J.J. McCarthy having that one-handed catch to the huge 3rd down pass to Roman Wilson. And then also with around 4 minutes left on their own 30, Michigan could have either punted the ball, used their 3 timeouts to get a stop, and then gone back and tried to get another score on offense. But instead, they went for it on 4th down, and they got a huge conversion, which ended up ending in a touchdown on that drive to tie the game and bring it to overtime. And then Kirby Smart, which many people consider to be the best coach in college football, he also understands that you need to be aggressive to win in these big games. And this has shown that it's a very high-risk, high-reward strategy. And Kirby Smart's lived this year where he went for that onside kick against Texas, which they recovered, and then scored another touchdown where they just completely ran away with the game before Texas even got a chance to get the ball back after their last score. But then Kirby also kind of died by the sword against Ole Miss, where he failed a 4th down conversion on like their own 30-yard line, and then Ole Miss went and scored. So despite it being a very risky strategy, it definitely paid off for all of these teams that have won national championships, and especially Indiana in this game, as they kind of went for those 4th down attempts and they converted, and that really helped them survive Miami's 4th quarter offensive success. And then another crazy stat that Indiana kind of keeps seeming to have is, I forget who posted this on Twitter, but I definitely saw someone post it. But Indiana had a blue chip ratio of 8%. And blue chip prospect is a 4 or 5 star player at a high school. And that's just crazy for the losingest program in college football history to take a team with such a low blue chip roster and take them to a national championship, when it seemed like at this point in college football you really needed those crazy talent edges. And it seemed like the rich get richer, where they're able to pay for talent and bring in the most talented players. But Indiana was able to do this with a very veteran-led team, with a lot of 4th, 5th, 6th-year seniors leading the team. And they showed that you don't need to have a ton of 4-star and 5-star players to be able to go and win a national championship. You just need to have an experienced team that executes very highly, and they do their job and they don't make mistakes. So they were incredible all playoffs all year long, and they definitely deserved to win the national championship. And yeah, just crazy that the first 16-0 team in the modern era was the Indiana Hoosiers. So pretty surreal, and just an incredible college football season. So now let's take a look at what Miami did in this game and what happened for them. And in the end of this game really just came down to which team made more mistakes, and that team was Miami. So Miami committed 7 penalties for 60 yards, and that a lot of those came on crucial 3rd downs, which those penalties kept Indiana on the field. And that also includes a false start when they were in 2-minute drill in their own stadium because of the crowd noise, which is pretty pathetic for the Miami fan base, that they allowed Indiana to have that home field edge in their own stadium, which is pretty nuts to think about. But Indiana, on the other hand, only committed 5 penalties for 38 yards. And so that alone gives Indiana a 22-yard edge in field position just from penalties alone. And one of those 5 penalties came after the interception to seal the game. where their DB took off his helmet after getting the pick. So really only 4 penalties throughout the majority of the game. But on offense, we said before the game that Carson Beck had to play clean for Miami to win this game, and he ended up making a mistake at the worst possible time, throwing the game-ending interception from Indiana's 40, where they had a lot of momentum on offense, but he ends up throwing. And he underthrew the pass into double coverage against cover two, which was just a horrible decision by him and killed Miami's national championship hopes. Throughout the game, Indiana's pass rush was only able to get to Beck for 1 sack, and the Miami O-line was doing a very good job in pass protection and not really letting them get to Carson Beck very often. But struggles running the ball at times and great coverage by Indiana made it difficult for Miami to move the ball and put a lot of the weight of the offense onto Carson Beck's shoulders. And he didn't really deal with it particularly well. There were many instances where Carson Beck had time to throw, but Indiana's pass coverage was just too good, or his ball placement just wasn't that good. Overall, Carson Beck ended as Miami's worst graded offensive player, and probably the worst graded player overall. The offense really wasn't able to do anything in the first half, as we mentioned earlier, where they only got their second first down 4 minutes left in the first half, which very, very limited on offense in the first half. And then in the second half, they were heavily reliant on explosive plays, especially very late in the third quarter and in the fourth quarter, where they did end up heating up and getting a few scores. But around halfway through the third quarter, Mark Fletcher Jr. had a 57-yard touchdown on the ground. And without that touchdown, Miami only had 53 rushing yards in the entire game. So obviously, you can't just take away a play that was a huge play in the game to kind of talk about the stats. But I think it just really highlights how difficult it was for Miami to run on this Indiana defense. And even though they did have that huge rushing touchdown, they really just had trouble getting the ball going on the ground overall during the game. And that put a lot of pressure onto Carson Beck to make a lot of big-time throws. And he just wasn't able to do that, especially in the key moments. A bright spot for Indiana, though, was that Mark Fletcher Jr. and Malachi Toney are superstars. And that really showed up in this game as they were carrying Miami's offense, especially late in the game. But Mark Fletcher Jr. had that 57-yard rushing touchdown, as we said earlier, and he also had one more touchdown on the ground. And overall, he ran for 112 yards on 17 carries, which ended up being 6.6 yards per carry. Malachi Toney, on the other hand, had 10 catches for 122 yards and 1 touchdown, which was just an incredible performance from the true freshman. And Miami's going to have a superstar for the next 2 years on their team. And I'm sure he'll be a very highly coveted NFL prospect once he's draft eligible. So incredible performances by them, even though Miami lost. But at the end of the day, the offense wasn't able to overcome that first half deficit, even though they outscored Indiana 21-17 in the second half. Miami's defense, on the other hand, did pretty much exactly what we said they needed to do to keep the game close. And before the game last week, when we were previewing the game, we said that they needed to keep Indiana under 4 yards per carry in this game. And they were able to do that, even keeping them under 3 yards per carry, which was just incredibly impressive and was not something anybody's been able to do to Indiana this year. But even more impressive was their pass rush, and they were able to dominate Indiana's O-line on the line of scrimmage, and they ended up sacking Mendoza 3 times. So the pass rush really showed why guys like Ruben Bain are such highly coveted draft prospects and why he'll probably be a top 5 pick, barring any like crazy draft slide, I guess. But they were really able to limit Indiana's ground game and forced Indiana into a ton of third and longs, which Indiana didn't really handle very well. They only had a few conversions on those third and longs. And it wasn't until late in the game when Mendoza was just incredible where they were able to get those conversions to Charlie Becker on that third down late in the game with 3 minutes left. But before that, Indiana really did not have much success against this Miami defense on those third and longs, aside from when Miami's defense gave up those critical penalties and kept Indiana on the field. And so like we said last episode, Miami could hold Indiana to under 3 yards per carry and get pressures on Mendoza, but it might not even matter, and it turns out that it didn't matter. So even though the defense played great, we saw that those special teams mistakes and Carson Beck's struggles in the pass game ended up being the difference in the game. And those penalties also were a huge, huge factor in the game. And so now we'll never know what it would have taken to beat this Indiana team, as no one was able to do it. And we also didn't even need to see Mendoza put a cape on and carry his team through the air. He really just needed to be willing to put his body on the line and really lay it all out, as he took a ton of hits throughout the game and then still stayed on his feet, dove for that touchdown, and gave them that cushion. So he just played incredible throughout the year, throughout the playoffs, and in this game, despite maybe his lackluster stat line in the box score. But watching the game, it's clear why he's going to be the number 1 pick and why he won the Heisman, especially with that rushing touchdown Heisman moment we talked about earlier. So what does Indiana winning the national championship mean for the Big Ten? I think it cements the Big Ten's place as the premier conference in college football right now. This is the 3rd straight year where a Big Ten team has won the national championship, with Ohio State and Michigan winning the years before this one. And in a time where we've seen pretty much an all-time high in SEC propaganda, it really doesn't line up with what we've seen on the field, especially in the bowl games and in the postseason. So the SEC only had 1 win against a non-SEC team in the playoffs, and that came against Tulane, where each time they went up against an out-of-conference opponent that was a Power 4 team, they lost. And that's also what we saw last year with Texas losing to Ohio State. We saw Georgia lose to Notre Dame. The year before that, we saw Michigan beat Alabama in the playoffs. And then we've also seen the SEC take losses to Big Ten teams in bowl games, like last year Illinois beating South Carolina, when a lot of people in the South definitely thought that South Carolina should have been a playoff team, and they thought that South Carolina got snubbed, and then Illinois showed up to their bowl game and took it seriously, and they won. And then this year, we saw Iowa, of all teams, go and beat Vanderbilt, and it wasn't a low-scoring defensive battle. Iowa was able to put up points on Vanderbilt, which, again, a lot of people were arguing for Vanderbilt to make the playoffs, and SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey was pushing for 7 SEC teams to make the playoffs, which is just insane, especially looking back on the season and seeing their lack of success in the bowl games and in the playoffs. So one thing we can't do is allow the SEC to get favorable terms for future playoff expansion based on their strength of schedule arguments and their so-called dominant reputation. And all year we've had to listen to the SEC talk about how nobody would be able to go undefeated in their conference, and all of these top Big Ten teams would go 9-3 or 10-2, and it's just different in the South. But we've seen that they haven't been able to hang with some of these Big Ten teams in the postseason, and even overall they just had a very poor record in the bowl games. So I think it's time for us to kind of redefine our expectations when discussing both conferences. And I think it's clear that the Big Ten has been the dominant conference in college football. And that lack of depth argument that the SEC has been pushing hasn't really held up, as we've seen in the non-playoff bowl games. I also think that it's clear that Curt Cignetti is the best coach in college football, and this is probably the most improbable title we will ever see. And so I think it's just an incredible coaching job from him, turning Indiana around in only 2 years and doing it with a very low talent roster according to the high school recruiting stars. And he's done it taking a lot of G5 players. He's taken a lot of players out of the portal, and he's just completely turned around pretty much the worst program in college football. And I think by winning this national championship, he's not only the current best coach in college football, but has an argument to be one of the best coaches in college football history. So congratulations to the Indiana Hoosiers for winning the national championship. And tune in for our future episodes where we're going to recap the best moments of the college football season and remember why this season was so special. And we'll also take a look at some of the proposed playoff expansion ideas coming out of the Big Ten and the SEC and talk about what we think about them. So thanks for tuning into the show tonight. We really appreciate your support. And it has been an incredible college football season, and we're already looking forward to the next one. But we will have content throughout the off season, so make sure you stay tuned and check the pod feed. So thank you, and have a great day.